Ladies and gentlemen, next speakers are Stephen Verhasselt, who's the VP Commercial from Liege Airport, and also Henk Venema, who's the Managing Director, the Netherlands DHL Global Forwarding. So we're coming again from the ACHL digital event. So both Stephen and Henk, welcome gentlemen. Really pleased to have you on board.
Thank you.
Okay, now gents, what we're trying to do, and we've been successful so far, is we're trying to focus on planned positives. And the theme of the event is from crisis to care, and do we really collaborate? So being as though the two of you would interlink nicely and generically because of the organizations that you work for, one being an airport and one being a forwarder, what we'd like to do is kick off the discussion. Firstly, how have things affected you both in your respective businesses, and what positives have you learned from those effects? So if we start with you, Henk.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's been probably, I'm in freight forwarding now for 16 years. This is after Ash Cloud and many heavy peak seasons has probably been the most weird year that I've seen in air freight, but not only in air freight. It's a year of extreme downs, especially when we come back to China, especially in my Netherlands organization. We do a lot of imports from China because of the geographical position of the Netherlands. And we basically saw a massive decline in volumes, which is typical during Chinese New Year. But after Chinese New Year, it obviously didn't pick up because of all the factory closings in China. So at the end of Q1, when Europe was also hit and the restrictions also came in Europe, we obviously saw the impact in the office as well, with people starting to work from home and all the measurements we had to put in place. But at the same time, we were confronted, especially starting the beginning of April, with a huge peak season in air freight. That was a very strong attempt to make up for and recover the volumes that were not shipped. And that added with obviously all the PPE shipments that were also coming in has represented a unique set of challenges for us, which we successfully went through. We've been able to handle a lot of freight and especially a lot of charters, which is the massive change that we saw obviously with all the passenger airlines stopping their daily services or double daily services. The massive challenge for us became the huge chunks of cargo arriving in one time. And I think that was the biggest challenge in air freight, that the predictability went down, and with the constant flow coming in through passenger flights, that is less size payloads coming in and on a frequent time basis, typically always on time. It moved to charter after charter, sometimes unannounced, because you know how it goes in a state of panic. So it was an extremely challenging time to get not only the air freight capacity orchestrated, but also the whole supply chain afterwards, because obviously with freight coming in batches of 100 tons, you need a lot of staging as well, because you cannot put everything immediately on a truck. You also need to do the value-added services like customs clearance, etc. afterwards. So the challenge was unique because the passenger lift was gone or utilized for PPE, and the huge chunks of freight coming in bulbs and the way to handle that with trucking capacity, with warehousing capacity, and with the extreme demand obviously coming from the market because everybody wanted product now, has made it quite a unique year. We obviously see now that we're in summer period, and the new normal, as everybody calls it, is a little bit in now. So people have gotten used to this new mojo. But obviously with the months ahead and all the challenges of a second wave, but also vaccines entering the market, and with the increased testing, and a huge amount of COVID tests are currently put in the air. We see the challenge for the next months again. But I mean, with the learnings of the first wave, I think the whole industry is at least now more familiar with all the challenges that come with it. But the critical factor will remain capacity, especially because with the second wave, the passenger airlines will for sure have a struggle until there is a good vaccine. And we will have to rely on freighter capacity, which we are doing. But it will represent a nice challenge. But I've also seen that the players in the chain have basically also through the urgency learned to better talk with each other and to come up with different solutions than the usual. And I think that's a good learning already from the first phase.
Very good. And Stephen has been politely waiting there. I can see him salivating, ready to say a few words. Now, Stephen, you've listened to that, and obviously the big pressures is on the capacity. And if anything, it's probably how to respond to a best case scenario. From an airport perspective, how do you feel that's been accommodated in Liege?
Well, the fact is, of course, that Liege is a little bit of a different animal. When I present my figures to the board, I only need to tell them that we only lost 200,000 passengers compared to last year. That's because we only had 200,000 last year. So that's percentage-wise, it's a big loss as everywhere else, but in numbers, it's not that important because we are a cargo airport. And yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride. I mean, it indeed started with Chinese New Year not picking up, let's say, being delayed by 3-4 weeks, and then all of a sudden, what we saw at that time was a very unbalanced demand in charters going eastbound, because at that time the PPE material was shipped out of Europe into China. Not only PPE, also a lot of perishables that were needed there. So we saw in February, March, we saw eastbound into China compared to last year a growth of 30%, and then that disappeared. And then due to PPE material and due to the fact that the Chinese economy restarted earlier than Europe and started churning out at full throttle, I would say. Then we saw April, May, June, all of a sudden the westbound charters growing by more than 30%. So all over, indeed, the big question has been how do you manage peak capacity? And what we have learned is that on the one hand, you can prepare. We had scenarios which we used before when we had, let's say, freighters coming in from zones where diseases were. We had the experience with the Ebola crisis, but we never had this experience. I mean, we were never hit in Liege ourselves, and at a certain point of time, we were hit. I mean, 25% of the work population didn't come to work. So we had to come up with cooperation. We did cooperate within the airport, where our different handlers really cooperated with each other to manage. On the other hand, we also saw we have some network handlers who managed to bring in people who were, well, as the passenger airports like Frankfurt, Paris, Amsterdam, Brussels, people were out of job there, while in Liège we were short of people. So we managed to transfer some people and to be flexible, also to convince those who decide on these things that if someone has a batch in Brussels or in Amsterdam, that same batch should be accepted in Liège as well, and he shouldn't run through the whole process. So I think we learned a lot, but the main issue is capacity, and especially peak capacity, because I think we're all nicely set up for the average capacity and average growth. But if at a certain point of time you have you have 15 freighters on the ground on a Saturday morning, that's not what your average peak capacity looks like. So then you have to make sure everything still starts moving or keeps moving. And that's indeed the lesson we learned. We need to try to plan in or come up with a plan for extreme peak capacities.
Yep, 100%. Now, obviously that's a huge logistics problem, but then again, we're all logistics experts here, so that's one of the that should be one of the easiest things that we do, and people would expect us to do it. Now, as far as coming up with solutions there, one of the things I'm going to ask you towards the end of the session is that you come up with 3 things that you would actually support from your perspective in your positions within the collaborative supply chain. and 3 things that you would like the supply chain to collaborate and give you some assistance. So if you could just bear that in mind, that'll be coming towards the end of the end of the session. Now, gents, as leaders of your own organisations, this is also, untrodden ground as far as references are concerned. And there's many great sayings about how to lead through a crisis. What have been the biggest personal challenges to each of you? So, Henk, what about yourself?
Well, I mean, the first challenge, I think, and obviously was IT equipment.
Yeah.
Because that was the immediate challenge. I mean, I always make the jokes. We did a series of town halls a couple of weeks ago, and I always made the joke that on the first days when the lockdown was announced, I saw half my staff running out of the office with screens and desktop computers under their arms. And I always luckily say, normally I would have called the police, but this time it was our crisis mitigation plan. But obviously, I mean, the main challenge at the first was to get everybody connected and set up at home.
Yeah.
Luckily, we just had a transformation to a new transport management system, which helpfully really enabled us to do a lot of work from home. So we remained at the office with a skeleton staff, while all the indirect functions, but also a lot of direct functions, actually started working on from home. I mean, our whole customs department has been working from home for 100% for 3 months in a row. I mean, imagine that 20 years ago, everybody would have said that that's impossible. And we even assessed when we did the pre-work that part of it would be possible, but we saw a high degree of roles that actually could operate from home, which is now a good patchwork to get through lockdown in the first part of the year, but also an expected increase of measures with the second wave. But it also sets a stage for the future, where I think in the future people will become way more flexible and open-minded when it comes to home working, because I think everybody knows by now that it works.
Yep.
The second part was, of course, safety, because we immediately founded a so-called incident management team with key members of the leadership, and our main 2 goals have been from the start very simple: keep our people safe and service our customers. Those were the only 2 things as a credo that we put into the company. We'll worry about the numbers later. First, we keep everybody safe, we keep our customers happy, and we make sure that we service them. And that's the main focus, just to make sure that everybody remained focused on what we thought was important at that time, and not on 100 priorities, just on 2. And then came the especially challenging part, because you lose the social component as well. And the social component that you have of working around, seeing people's faces, seeing if they're happy or not, if you can help them with anything. I think that was the main challenge for everybody, to stay connected, and to stay connected in such a way that people are not losing the connection to the organization, but also that people watch their working hours. Because we did a lot of interviews with team leaders on how do you see your team working in a virtual setup, and how do you do. I mean, we have 500 people, more than 500 people in the DGF Netherlands organization. At a certain moment, more than 350 were working from home. So how do you keep everybody connected and part of the organization, and how do you also reward the effort that everybody's going through? Because I mean, we are company leaders. We always start to worrying a little bit about the numbers, but there was also people that had personal anxieties, because a pandemic is also creating personal unrest about health, about family, and recognizing that, allowing people to also take care of the children, of personal stuff. I mean, we had thousands of conference calls with barking dogs and crying children and what comes of it. And I think that with the relaxed attitude that we had around that, if somebody called and said, listen, I have to do something else this afternoon, with working from home, that doesn't really matter. Go do your things, do what you need to do. I mean, as long as at a certain moment, if something gets finished, what's finished, that's all that matters. And rewarding that, making sure that we do some personal attention, send some nice presents around, do some nice interactive gathering. That's good to keep the staff morale and motivation up, and to keep everybody together. The one thing that still strikes me personally, and that's when you talk about leadership, is that actually you see that in middle management, but also sometimes in team management, that is that the old-fashioned thinking that you need your staff around so you can control them and see their productivity. I mean, that needs to leave the window. I mean, that era is gone. I think that we have all learned even more than we thought that all of our employees have a high degree of responsibility, and that actually the only concern I see is that if people are working from home, they tend to work longer and seem to struggle more with the balance between work and private life. And I think that is something that we're watching, that we're trying to facilitate. But those were the three things that basically kept us busy and made it very clear. So really prioritize on the focus, stay safe, and manage your customers, and worry about the other stuff later. And in the meanwhile, keep everybody together and motivated. That was the key task, especially with the huge workload.
Yeah, and it's incredible. It's incredible how such a terrible thing has given such positive openings of minds to be more understanding, to be more appreciative, and to be more flexible with the way people work. And if that happens again, it's going to influence so many things like, where you live, your reduced transport time to work, environmentally friendly. You're going to have a better balance with your family. So there's a lot of good coming out of it.
It's a great development, because actually, I mean, before the economic crisis, I mean, every forwarder, but also handler airline had a huge struggle to find qualified staff.
Yep.
And that's because we're always historically bound, especially in Europe and Americas, to airport terrain. In Asia, that's a little bit different, because in Hong Kong and Shanghai, many people have city offices. But in Europe and the Americas, people don't. It's on the airport. And that's usually not the best way to reach by public transport, because we're always on cargo areas in the back and not on the nice forefront. And I think that when it comes to being attractive as an employee or as an employer, but also reaching a different workforce, people don't necessarily have to come to the airport anymore.
Yep.
I mean, and you can tap into a whole new potential of workforce. And I think that for the long run, that the new leadership that is requested from that, but also the trust in your employees, that even if they are not at the office, they are really doing their job.
Yeah,
I think that realization has come now, and that people are also entering the modern era. Now it's forced by the pandemic, but I think sooner or later it was bound to happen anyway.
Yeah, but it's been sped up now, which is a good positive thing. Thank you very much. Now, Stephen, over to yourself. What have been the personal big challenges, or the benefits that you've seen?
Well, the personal challenge for me, being in a bit of a strange situation where I do work for Liege Airport, but I do live in Hong Kong, and normally I commute once a month. That has now not happened since 6 months, so it's had to adapt. Not so much for me, because I'm actually used to calling in on meetings and to attend meetings, but now the rest of the team does it as well, and well, I think people now only realize, on the one hand, that it is really possible not to be present and still be part of the team. I think that's clear for everybody now. On the other hand, it also shows that it is sometimes difficult, because I agree that we can do a lot with Zoom and WebEx and you name it, but in the end, if there's an issue, the best way to solve it is over a coffee in the morning or over a beer in the evening, and that has gone.
And it's going to be gone for a long time.
Yeah, I know, but that's something we need to adapt to. And then as far as the airport is concerned, I think what we learned most is about how the airport community works, because this is something new. It's a pandemic. On the one hand, you have every corporation who is trying to come up with rules to protect its own staff and its own people. On the other hand, in an airport community like ours, you have Belgian companies, you have European companies, but you also have American companies on site, you have Chinese companies, you have Israeli companies, and all these companies are following the news at home and the regulations at home, because that's the natural thing to do. Even me here in Hong Kong, I tend to follow much more the news in Belgium than I ever used to. And then as an airport, you need to make sure that in your communication, in your let's say rules and regulations, especially about safety and security, on the one hand, you need to make sure that everybody is well informed about what you are doing and what you are expecting from them. On the other hand, you have to be flexible enough to make the building to make the thing work, and it's all good to say you have to keep 1.5 meter social distancing at all times, but when a pallet is stuck in an airplane, you're gonna have 4, 5, 6 guys who are gonna go in there and push it. That's the reality. And they are shoulder to shoulder. If not, that pallet is not going to move. So you have to strike a balance between the regulations that you put in place and the way you check on it, and then on the other hand, the reality of the circumstances. So that is something that I think we learned a lot. We thought we had it well in place, but then you also see that an airport in the end is a small community, and if one handling company, just to give an example, if in one company the let's say the management is handing out protective gear, and in the other company they are telling the staff, if you need protective gear or if you want protective gear, as it is not obligatory by the government, you have to take care of your own. That does create problems. And then as an airport, you have to try and manage this kind of thing. The third thing that we had to do at a certain point of time was really motivating the staff to keep coming to work, because not everything can be done from home. And we saw an absenteeism which we created ourselves, because first thing you tell the people is, if you feel a cough, if you feel a fever, if you feel anything, you think you're not well, please don't come to work. And then what you have is that someone's gonna feel something, or maybe someone is gonna think, well, the schools are closed, I need to take care of the kids, nobody else is here, I do feel a cough and I'm not going to work. So we had to do, again, on an airport level, for the whole community, not only for Liege airport staff, but for the whole community, a kind of value your job, and we saw all the applauses for the first line staff, and all that was thoroughly deserved. We launched a campaign where we said, look, these people cannot do their jobs if you guys are not coming to the airport, and you need to recognize that, because every single person who gets in his car or who gets on the bus to come to work at the airport has to take a personal decision and has to overcome some personal anxiety. And on the other hand, well, if the rest of the family stays at home and you go to work, you become the risk factor. So we really had to work on this community feeling and on motivating the people, and on really the way we put it, and I 100% believe in it, is that some jobs are needed, and without the airports, the PPE material, which was so needed in the hospitals, would never have reached there. So I value every single person at every single airport in the world who went to work and made that happen. I think they really played an important role as well, and I think we need to keep emphasizing that.
Oh, 100%. That's why it's, crisis to care. And one of the most important things is, after this, that we continue to care. Now, gents, you've given me some good answers to some questions. What I'm going to do now is shorter answers to a few key issues, okay? And
I'll try.
Not too sensitive. Yeah, good one, Henk. I appreciate that one. Listen, not too sensitive, but right. One of the things that you brought up there, Stephen, is about a lack of consistency from authorities, from airports, from organisations everywhere. Now, personally, I think that's one of the things that's confusing people, because everybody says or they try and say a modicum of common sense should be applied. Well, common sense isn't common. And as soon as you give people too many choices, they don't know what to choose. So very quickly, and in a very, very, very straightforward, direct response, do you think organizations, authorities, regulatory bodies have now got to come together and be more precise in their instruction? Yes or no? Henk?
Well, I can speak for my territory, and that's obviously the Netherlands. Initially, I would say yes, but that was more at the beginning. I think now I would say no. I think that people have done their learnings now, and overall have seen that you have to be very, very clear in the measures, even though they might be unpopular, but you have to be clear. And I think that.
And do you think they're clear enough now?
For the Netherlands, they're clear. I think the one thing that's not clear, and that is more related to the airports and basically to the government, is what's the policy now? Especially the challenge that we had in the Netherlands was landing rights being declined for certain freighter operators.
Yep.
And honestly, I think that political interest at the moment should not be anybody's priority.
Correct.
And that is weird when you have an airport that is really in desperate need of any slot that can be given to anybody to let political deliberations be part of a discussion whether a freighter should go to Amsterdam or Maastricht or Liege. And I think there needs to be a very clear policy that, especially when the airports are all underutilized and the cargo is needed at a certain point, the waste that goes into trucking cargo from A to B, while it can also be placed directly somewhere, that should be eliminated. Because that helps anybody. For the rest, in terms of measures, I think the clarity is there.
Okay. Stephen, same question. Start off with a yes or no, and then you can elaborate.
What's yes again?
Do you agree? Do you agree that at the moment, authorities, governments, businesses should be more clear and precise with their instructions? So the example you gave about one handler giving out PPE and another one saying that it's not 100% necessary from a government perspective. So if you want it, you wear it yourself or buy it yourself. For me, that's ludicrous.
So yes, I think it's still not. I mean, I can compare between me living in Hong Kong and being in Hong Kong and in Asia and following what's happening in Belgium. And although I do not agree on the way or on the strictness of the rules in Hong Kong as they are, because when you look at the figures, they might be a little bit exaggerated. But fact is that everybody knows what to do, what to follow, and how to do it. And then let me bring it to a European level. I honestly think that this whole COVID crisis has shown that the EU as a union does not really exist. I mean, it would make so much more sense if these rules and regulation were done on a EU level rather than on a national level. And then when I bring it back to Belgium, of course, wonderful Belgium, small Belgium with its three governments or more, three and counting. But if you bring it in a Belgian level, the fact that there are differences between Flanders and Wallonia, and the fact that there are differences within Flanders between the province of Antwerp and the province of next door, I think there is really a need to bring some sense in it and to try to bring it to a higher level and then make clear decisions. Yes, I really believe there is a need for that.
Well done, lads. That's two of the longest yeses I've ever heard in my life. Really appreciated.
Yeah, but then ask easier questions.
Just to throw my cap in the ring, I think the decisions that were made early on, including WHO, were ridiculous, and especially around the face mask. For people to be saying it wasn't effective and it wasn't necessary and confusing people, I don't understand it. I'm not asking you two gentlemen to comment on that, but from my perspective, absolutely ridiculous. And now to see where we are now, it's a huge learning curve. Now, what I'd like to ask you both, and I'd like to start with you, Henk, is now that there's a greater focus on hygiene. So, everybody of a certain age can remember now their grandmothers, grandfathers saying, wash your hands, do this, do that. And then to a degree, it died off a little bit. But now it's obvious and it's being pushed. But let me ask you something. If we were to reduce the number of touch points, okay, obviously that would make things safer. So if you look at what we're doing with so many touch points with the documentation, inaccurate FHL messaging, all of the origin digitization issues that could be addressed now, why do you think people are still not taking it on board as quickly as they should? So from a forwarder's perspective, you love the airway bill and the house airway bill. From a perspective, you've got so many touch points where the documentation has to be checked, It's crazy, gents. Why now can we not get rid of that?
Well, I mean, I remember I was chairman of Cargo IQ a couple of years ago, asking myself that same question over and over again. I mean, it's always more complex. I think the main issue is ownership. There is not a single standard that is forced upon everybody. It is the United Nations is already an example of all opinions coming together and then the consensus leading towards a very, very safe solution. And I think that's what you also see when it comes to the documentation. I mean, if we set aside country regulations, because you will always have the Brazils of this world with the blue ink, and all that comes with it. I mean, the technology is there. It is now, I think, and there people should not wait for a community. It's up to certain people to enforce a standard, and that's where I think that this industry, especially the freight forwarding industry, is still living in a different era. We have a couple of technical challenges, but the most simple thing, the e-era bill, I mean, it should be a done deal by now, for instance, same as the FHL and the FWB.
Yeah.
And still you see that people have their challenges with it. I mean, if I can speak for my company, we are on a digital journey that is, I think, right now becoming market leader when it comes to our internal systems. And internally, we are able to work paperless to a large extent. I mean, we are even sending communications to our customers to stop sending physical paperwork with the cargo because we don't need it. Yep. I mean, we can file everything in our system. The one file principle that we have in the company makes that the overseas office can see any documentation related to a shipment already in the shipment itself in PDF. We can communicate it from department to department. So I think for us internally, paperless is already there, and it is a given fact. But there comes the old-fashioned outside world that with so many stakeholders, with so many interests, that is so hard to push that standard through. Where I always take the example that sometimes this industry needs a stick and carrot approach, and that's the only way we seem to respond. And that's what you saw when the e-bookings were coming in place, where you sometimes almost need to penalize us for doing the extra thing with paperwork, because then we'll stop it.
Yep.
That's the strange part. And that's where I see that I mean, there's so many things that should be a standard nowadays that at a certain moment, I think we need now ownership and a clear guideline and say, this is what it's going to be, end of story. And otherwise we don't handle it.
Yep. And stop faffing around trying to please everybody. I would say
it will not happen.
Yeah. Never mind.
You won't please everybody.
Never mind the stick and carrot. I think it needs a stick, a stone and a baseball bat. People need to be pushed into doing what's right, because it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, Stephen, from your perspective, and with the airport, obviously the amount of times that drivers and agents and forwarders and everybody has to come in contact with documentation at your airport. Do you think there's an opportunity for airports to start driving initiatives such as paperless airport, such as certain criteria where the airport takes the lead? Do you think there's an opportunity now for that to start to happen?
there is an opportunity, and there are initiatives. We have introduced our cargo cloud with the application, especially an application for truck booking slots, for example, which the next phase should include documentation and so on and so on. I think the biggest issue in there is the elephant in the room that nobody likes to point at, is the fact that every touch point and every document is a reason for an invoice.
Exactly.
And as long as people think that digitization is gonna cost them in
revenues,
in losing opportunities to send invoices to each other, then it's not going to be adopted easily, and then you will have indeed we tried the carrot and maybe the stick and the baseball bat will work better, but I think what we see in order to get it adopted is the most important is to present the added value. And I can understand that for big companies and for airlines, it is easy to see the added value, and even for big trucking companies as well. But for the smaller fish, who are also an important part of the logistics chain, for them to see the added value is maybe less clear, because what they see is they look at what happened in passenger, and what they see is that all the booking agents and all the travel agencies are basically closed, and that's the reality. So yes, there is an opportunity, and I think the airport needs to play a leading role in it, because of the simple reason that we are covering this whole community, and if we're not gonna do it as the objective partner to all these different parties acting on the airport, well, probably nobody else will be able to do it without being penalized by it, by losing business. So yes, I believe we need to do it, and what in the slides that I prepared, one of the lessons learned is that digitization, we're all talking about it and we all put steps, but now we only realize that they are really only baby steps. Also that digitization is not an objective, it's just a tool to make the business better. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah.
And I think there to add indeed, Stephen, because I fully agree also on the revenue part. I think that we are only still in the first step of the digitization, and I think that is that we are now making certain manual steps digitally visible, but still the step and trigger is manual. And I think you see that especially also with the messaging coming from the airlines, right, with the departed messages, etc. That is fully automated, but a move within a warehouse is still a manual move, being logged sometimes hours later just to get the timestamp in. Yep. And the real step is, of course, now also digitizing that. The complexity that we always use as an excuse, because I mean, the industry always looks at the integrators, and especially internally, I can look at the integrator very well because we have one in-house.
Exactly.
And says, why are we not like an integrator? And then our standard answer is always, yeah, because we have so many parties in the supply chain. And we always seem to use that as a sort of excuse, like, yeah, but that's why we don't deliver, because there's so many parties in the supply chain, it's too complex. But what you need with so many parties, and in other industries, is standards. And standards that everybody unconditionally adheres to. And I think that there, the start is only to be made still.
Yeah, and the reality that if we don't change, and you're able to see from both sides of the net, if we don't change, somebody else will come in and take over, and then it will be too late. So this protectionism of minimal revenues for services that basically are not required, it's short-sighted, and it's going to drag everybody else down. So what's the point of enjoying yourself in a fish tank if the fish tank is starting to fall onto the floor, because you're all going to be scrambling around? So I definitely would suggest, and I'm not saying it's right, but in most cases, I've always seen the baseball bat is much, much, much more effective than people who say, please, will you, or this is why. And now,
well, in line of the conversation today, we should talk about a positive baseball bat. But still a baseball bat.
Exactly, my friend. It just depends how you swing it.
Yeah, indeed. And at what you point at.
Exactly. And very good bringing it back onto positives, because if we're able to clean up with all the paperwork, that's a huge positive for people's well-being. And the well-being is so important. Now, coming back again to like micro communities or ecosystems, I genuinely believe, Steve, irrespective of the size of the airport, airports now can really, really influence what goes on collectively within their border domain. Okay, now, even things like well-being, and I really appreciate what both you said about the staff and everything. There are lots of things that can be done and that are out there now, whereby everybody has got a watch now, or they got a Fitbit or whatever, and if they haven't done their 10,000 steps, they chase the dog or the cat around the room until they get to the 10,000. There are things out there now where people could start looking at their own well-being, and that would make the decisions whether they can or they can't go into work, with the understanding that in some cases it's so important to be there at work. Now, as far as training and keeping people involved and keeping people updated, what do you actually do for your workforces that keep them part of the aviation community or the aviation family? Henk?
Oh, it was me. I mean, the good part about the trainings, first of all, also about the environmental well-being. I mean, our company has a very clear strategy when it comes to our social responsibility, and that is the ambition to be carbon neutral in 2050.
Yeah,
2050, 50, just to emphasize. That's obviously quite ambitious when you have more than 200 or 300 airplanes in your fleet as well, but still, we have always been able to do that, and that ambition, amongst others, is to have about 80% of our staff in the next 5 years become a certified Go Green specialist, as we call them. So, and that is a very fundamental training on well-being, but also on taking care of your environment and how you can do that at the office and home environment, and also take that along in the customer journey, etc. When we go to keeping everybody connected, actually anything can be done virtually. I mean, we have the basic trainings, of course, aviation security being one of them, which is a mandatory thing, can be done virtually. Dangerous goods training, a little bit more complicated. So we are still doing that by classroom, because obviously that's quite a challenge. And then with the increased amount of dangerous goods, that needs focus. But overall, right now, we are using the time we have to do classrooms. But the switch to virtual is so easy, because if I see the online catalog of my own company, but also the digital offering of a lot of aviation-related trainings, I think that we should not be surprised that in a certain point classrooms become obsolete as well for that connectivity. When it comes to the cargo community, relating to that, I think that the key thing I also have seen around, and in previous roles I was a little bit more global oriented, is that the communities that are winning now are the cargo communities that already had a clear strategy before Corona, which they perfectly played out during, but the foundation was already laid way before, with strong cargo focused airports now getting their moment to shine.
Yeah,
and that's where I saw the massive challenge in my home countries, because if there's one thing where I was always a criticaster, was the cargo focus of Amsterdam Airport for that instance, and that you saw because there's hardly there was a dedicated cargo department in the past driving community initiatives, and nowadays it's part of the marketing and sales department, and there you also see the facilitating role of the airport becoming less.
Yeah.
So that's where, and I'm also part of Air Cargo Netherlands. That's where Air Cargo Netherlands really jumped to the forefront, also when it comes to COVID measures, but also when it comes to thanking the community and everybody that's being part of the community. And that's where you saw that happening. So, I mean, when it comes to trainings and the mandatory stuff, virtual. When it comes to the community, I mean, it's being online and recognizing and visibly recognizing everybody's efforts.
No, that's right, and and you were kind enough to allude to my baseball bat as perhaps not being the most positive, but even so, it is if it's disciplined. But also the respect and the recognition of everybody who's done so much in this period of time is exceptional. And please God, one of the things that the whole community and cross industries won't do is forget how effective it's been. So I appreciate.
And there, I think we should also, because we're now talking with an airport and a forwarder, and obviously, I mean, a forwarder is asset light.
Yeah.
And in these times, you see and you see that also in the published numbers, that forwarders are doing reasonably well, obviously due to the market circumstances. I mean, I see the airports and also cargo handlers having a tough time because there's huge cargo volume, but on the passenger side, it's a massive struggle. I mean, and there's already a lot of recognition that should go that way. Where I also have a recognition is with the airlines, especially with the passenger airlines, because I mean, they have been pushing full front on cargo solutions, despite the fact that on the other hand, people worry about their jobs, about the future of their company, and still they have been pushing hard and delivering unbelievably amounts of capacity and solutions. And I think their recognition is also in play, because that's been simply awesome what's been happening there.
Yeah. I wouldn't be as bold as to say that you'd welcome THC increases, Henk, but I'm sure we can talk about that some other time. But
I remain to be a forwarder, so the answer is always no.
And Stephen?
Well, it's about keeping people motivated and working, and I think recognizing the cargo community is something we've been doing for many years. I mean, we have. It's not that famous yet, but many of your colleagues already came down to Liege for what is becoming the annual crazy no curfew party, which is one night where we close down the passenger terminal and turn it into a mega party area where all the staff, not only of Liege Airport, but of all the cargo community, is welcome to join. And it's like, I mean, it starts off with a kind of let's say more official part, where we present the numbers of the year before and so on. But then it just turns into a party with the whole passenger terminal becoming party area. And that is something that we've been, unfortunately this year we cannot do it, but it will be back with a bang as soon as we can do it, because fact is that everybody deserves a party. When you work hard, you deserve a party. And our next no curfew party, I can promise to everybody in the Liege cargo community and everybody who wants to join, our next no curfew party will be a big one, will be the biggest one ever, and it will be well deserved for everybody who will be there.
I can see Henk with a smile on his face. Henk,
I want the invite.
Happily get an invite to that one, I hope. All right, guys. Now, listen, as I said earlier, just before the end, I just wanted to ask you again, and we'll rotate between the two, but what three things would you, in your own capacity, be willing to collaborate on or to contribute for the good of the community or for the good of the supply chain? So if we start with you, Stephen, this time, what three things from an airport's perspective?
Well, first of all, I would like to see the free flow of airport staff, if I can call it like that, meaning that badges, that airport badges to go airside should be recognized not on an airport level, but on a well, maybe at least Belgian level, Benelux level, European level.
Yeah.
Even Europe plus Brexit level, I don't mind. I don't want to exclude anyone. So I really believe that could help also in managing peak capacity, not only in these days, but also in the future. The other thing that that I do believe in is the valuation of freighters, because I think freighters, not only freighter airport, but freighters and the cargo department of airlines is not always deemed to be the most sexy part, but I think that in the last month it has been proven that the logistics chain without freighters will come to a halt. So maybe when everything is back in place and people are telling freighter operators, I can get 20% cheaper in belly capacity, so I'm going to switch my capacity there. Maybe we have to remember that one day the freighters might be of bigger importance again. So the valuation of freighters and cargo department. And last of all, and this is something that I've been talking to you about it and to others, I think the way the regulators look into aviation should change as well. I mean, the time of bilateral agreement, which are really based on flying back and forth passengers between countries, passengers who board in one country, fly somewhere and go back. Fact is that the cargo market doesn't work like that. So all the regulations for traffic rights, for slots, and for many other things should be decoupled. That I think it needs to be decoupled between, let's say, whatever passenger operation will be there in the new normal, and whatever freighter keeps running. So I really hope that it's part of the valuation of the freighters is the fact that the decoupling of regulations is important. Finally, the last thing is that we need to keep pushing on digitization, because that's really the only way that we will be able to manage to stay flexible enough to deal with peak capacities whenever they come. It's the digitization. We cannot keep building more warehouses next to. We need to use the resources that we have more efficiently, and the best way to do it is to make sure that the cargo movement is not blocked by the fact that the documents are not there or are missing or have not been dealt with yet.
Yeah. Okay. And what would you like to propose? Because we're combining the two now. What would you like to do for the community or for the supply chain as an airport?
Well, I think as an airport, as I said before, we need to take the leading steps in this digitization. We can not force people, but we have our cargo cloud, and we need everyone to buy into it, because we make it available, but then everybody has to follow. And it's not only about companies, it's also about governments, it's about customs, who is doing a great job in Belgium. But fact is that customs operate on both sides when it comes to air freight. It's about phytosanitary checks. It's about everything. Everybody should buy into it and agree that whatever data they have on their screen is as valuable as a hardly readable copy that comes from somewhere flying onto their desk. I think that's really, and airports have to play a leading role in there. We are there. We are on the one hand doing it locally with our community cloud. We are trying to roll it out globally with the aviation brain, which is an AI tool from Ali Cloud, who is trying to group together all the cargo clouds of the hubs they appointed for their cargo smart hubs. But honestly, it's a great plan, but we have so many steps to take, and I can only hope that in Liege and in other airports people will keep pushing, because that's really the only way we can move forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. And now Henk, in a consolidated roundup, if possible.
Well, actually, that was the nice part. You didn't even recognize that Stephen actually mentioned 4 points, so I only have 2 left. Okay, so no, I mean, what I mean, and especially in terms of my capacity, but also in terms of learnings, I think that my personal efforts will forego into a better agreement between and better cooperation model between freight forwarder and cargo handler.
Yeah.
There I've seen the biggest gap in terms of expectation management, but also in terms of lead time and delay reason, because people simply don't talk with each other. People don't have a clear way of contracting each other and don't have a clear way mutually. I say that deliberately because it's on us as much as on the ground handler to now finally come together and come towards a standard operating model when it comes to who's the customer of the cargo handler. And that's on one side the airline, but on the other side it's also the forwarder. And I think that part still needs, apart from the broader community, is one of the biggest learnings I've seen, where I'm going to put my efforts on to get that at least more clear and visible, because in many times there's not even a KPI agreed between a forwarder and a cargo handler. And that's actually, if you come think of it, it is absolutely insane in 2020 that we don't have that. So I'm going to push on that one. And next to that, and that's close to home, I'm going to devote quite some time on voicing opinion and providing guidance on the cargo focus of Amsterdam Airport. I mean, we've all seen now that with all the noise that's about that for the past years, that cargo is unbelievably important for the economic development of the area. And I think that now is shown that it is. And it's so easy, that the same as we clap for the forefront workers in healthcare, right? We clap for them on one day, but next day we don't agree on their salary increases. That's how the world works, unfortunately. And it's the same for cargo. Everybody's not clapping for cargo, but when passenger is back and they see the revenue of passenger, cargo needs to stay on the forefront, whether it's in the board of the airlines, but also whether it's in the focus of an airport. An airport should really realize and see that cargo is saving part of the show now and deserves a seat at the table in the board at an airport as well. And I think that is the critical part that we need to focus on, and freighters are a part of that. And last but not least, I think that we have learned, and digital is the tag word, so I'm going to leave digital aside for now. I think that bringing it all together, we still have quite some peaks coming as a result of Corona. Now it's the COVID tests. First it was the PPE material, and sooner or later it will be the vaccine, hopefully sooner than later. Yeah, I think that people still underestimate the massive investment that every part of the chain needs to do when it comes to cold chain facilities, when it comes to visibility, when it comes to tracking, when it comes to temperature logging, and rush demand that is coming from this, because people still seem to have the idea that this is going to be planned. While the reality that we all see is that it's going to come out in batches, the production will be very hard to control. It's going to spike at craziest moments. And I think the investment that we are doing obviously is to make sure that from an infrastructure perspective, we're ready, but also in terms of capacity, relying to what Stephen said as well. I mean, the freighters are invaluable. They have always been to us. We are operating quite a lot ourselves as well. But you also see now in the market that basically the market becomes split in the haves and the have-nots. And that basically applies to those who have own capacity and the ones who don't. Yeah. And I think we're going to massively work to get that capacity to facilitate whatever's coming at us, and to have that for a longer term than just 1 or 2 months, because this is going to drag on for a while. And those are the 3 things, but especially that cooperation between the handlers and that cargo focus that is now having momentum, that we need to carry on. Yep. Okay, good. And anything that you would like coming the other way? Not at this stage. Good man. Excellent. Listen, lads, I really appreciate it. We've had a good old session there, and hopefully people will enjoy it. And an industry that loves letters and acronyms and everything, we've now got a new one, which is the CSBB. So it's a common sense baseball bat. So we'll be able to use that whenever in the future.
I've enjoyed talking to you both. Really appreciate it. And it's tough times for everybody. And I'm sure, you know, your respective organisations have had some casualties. And one of the things that we should all try and do from a positive perspective is keep them part of the aviation family, so that, please God, one day in the next 2 years or so, when there's opportunities to come back, that they're the first ones that are welcome back, you know, with a big hug. And you know, we've missed you, and this is the reason why we survived, is because some people have had to take a hit. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you soon, and definitely look forward to seeing you at the no curfew party in
yeah. If you need my email address, Stephen, let me know. I need the invite.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.